So we've downloaded and installed Lightpanel. Let's get started using the application. The first thing we need to do is we need to open up both Lightpanel and Adobe Lightroom Classic. Remember, Lightpanel works directly inside of Adobe Lightroom Classic, so we need to have Lightroom open so that we can use Lightpanel alongside it. So I have both Lightroom Classic and Lightpanel open. And when I'm using Lightroom and Lightpanel alongside one another, both of the windows are going to be open. You can see I have Lightpanel here and I have Adobe Lightroom Classic directly behind it. Now, what I like to do to ensure a nice seamless workflow and a much easier viewing experience is I like to click on the Lightpanel window itself, and I'll drag that all the way to the right here, just like that. And then I'll click on the Lightroom window and I'll just resize it. I'll pull this right side over to the left to resize my Lightroom window. That way I can view Lightpanel here to the right, and then I can view Lightroom Classic at the same exact time. Now, if you don't want Lightpanel to launch automatically whenever you open up Lightroom, go into this bottom left section of Lightpanel and click on Preferences. Now, in the General tab here, just disable Start with Lightroom. That way it doesn't automatically open every time you open up Lightroom. And then inside of Lightroom, if you want to run Lightpanel or open up Lightpanel, just go to your File menu and go into Plugin Extras, and then just choose Start for Lightpanel there. But I like to have Lightpanel open up every time, so I'm just going to go into my General tab and Preferences, and I'll just re-enable that Start with Lightroom option there. So before we jump into using Lightpanel, I would highly recommend that you start with a new job or a copy of an existing project that you've been working on. The reason being is that Lightpanel is going to overwrite the metadata, such as the flags, the star ratings, and the color labels that you've already made inside of Lightroom Classic. So starting with a new job or a smaller job or even a duplicate of the job you've already been working on will allow you to explore how Lightpanel works without affecting the work you've already done. So starting with a new job or a smaller set of photographs or even just a copy of an existing project that you've been working on will allow you to jump into Lightpanel without removing all of the work that you've already done. So let's begin by setting up our preferences inside of Lightpanel. So whenever we open up Lightpanel for the first time, we're going to be met with this dialog here. It's this little Lightpanel tutorial dialog. Essentially, it's going to be steps that you can take to get started with Lightpanel. The first step here says press the glowing preferences button. This is where you can configure the preferences for your culling metadata usage for how different groups of photographs are flagged or rated. So what we're going to do is we're going to go down here and click on Preferences. So we'll pull up the Preferences dialog for Lightpanel, and we're inside of this Cull tab here. So first things first, we're going to set up how we rate images and place them into various groups. So there's 5 different groups. We have Selects, Filtered, Duplicates, Eyes Closed, and then Blurry. Selects, this is going to be the images that you eventually send off to the client. I like to think of them as your favorites. These are the best of the batch, if you will. These are the images that you're eventually going to either edit or you're going to send off to the client. Below that is filtered. Now, filtered is just all of the images that were detected that are either duplicates, they have eyes closed, or they're blurry. So it's not every single photograph within that job. It's just the images that the AI detected as being either a duplicate, having eyes closed within that image, or having blurriness within the photograph. We then have duplicates, which are images that are very similar in that they have similar expressions, they were taken in the same spot, they were taken in a very similar time frame, and so those would be the duplicates. We then have eyes closed, images that have faces that have eyes closed within them. And then we have images that lack focus, and that would be considered blurry. Now, for each of these groups, you can modify how you rate an image to place it into that group. So by default, selects are 5 stars because they're the 5-star photograph. But you can always modify that if you want it to be maybe a flag rating or you want it to be a color rating. You can do that really easily by just modifying that within this set of preferences. Now, eyes closed and blurry by default are going to be yellow and then red. But again, you can always adjust that to your Lightroom workflow and what you're used to using for rating. And you could set that up right in there. Now, below that, we have culling defaults. This is how the AI is going to analyze that group of photographs within your Lightroom catalog. So the first option here is analyze. So by default, it's set to deep. That's just meaning that it's going to dive a little bit deeper into the analysis of those images to try to find as many of these different groups as possible. Now, if you're in a rush and you just need to get the analysis done with, that's when you can go in and choose quick. Essentially, it's going to speed up the analysis and it's not going to dive as deep into finding these different groups of images. Now, I typically like to use deep, but again, if you're in a rush or in a hurry and you just need to get the analysis out of the way, that's when I would recommend going for quick. We then have visual similarity. So this is going to determine the similarity between images that are flagged as duplicates. Now, I typically like to keep this just as 1, but if you're working with different types of jobs, you may want to increase this to find images that may be a little bit more similar than other groups of photographs. Below that, we have time between photos. Now, by default, this is set to 1 minute, and that's really typical for photographing portraiture or weddings. But if you're photographing sports or you're really hitting the shutter and you're cranking out tons and tons of photographs, you may want to modify this time between photographs so that it's not grabbing a bunch of similar images or a bunch of images that aren't similar and placing them as duplicates. And then so down here we have duplicate photo max. You can modify that default. It's at 6 right now, but if you need to have more than 6 as a duplicate photo max, you can always just adjust that slider there. So that's how to get started with your basic preferences inside of Lightpanel. In the next lesson, we'll jump into analyzing and actually culling through our first job.